ずんだもんなのだ。この動画は海外プレイヤー、ジーフの解説動画を翻訳したものなのだ。動画の制作及び投稿に快く許可をくれたジーフに感謝するのだ。概要欄にジーフのチャンネルや X のアカウントを載せておくのでフォローするのだ。感想とか要望もコメントに書いてくれたら嬉しいのだ。それでは本編に行くのだ。
Hi guys, I'm Rank 1 player Jeef, and I'm here to present to you guys the most important guide you'll ever watch, the Leveling Guide Updated 2025. You guys may have watched the previous Leveling Guide, but that was a year ago, and since then, I've improved a lot as a player, and the game has changed in a lot of different ways as well. So hope you guys enjoy the new and improved Leveling Guide. Chapter 1. Leveling to Tavern 2. Let's start with Standard Curve. On turn 2, you have 4 gold, and it costs 4 gold to level, so you usually level cleanly just like that. This is called Standard Curve because it's the standard line of playing. I would say maybe 80 to 90% of your games should be leveling on turn 2. Not leveling means you're buying 1 drops while other players are buying 2 drops, which means you're just weaker than other players starting from turn 3. And you don't want to start the game playing from behind. You want to be the person buying the quality 2 drops yourself. We still need to go over the other 10% of scenarios where you don't actually level on turn 2. This is almost always a result of your hero power. Some heroes have specific leveling patterns. These heroes usually have 1 cost hero powers that require you to hero power every turn. One such hero is Captain Eudora. The ultimate goal of Eudora is to get your treasure on turn 4 while being on Tavern 3, meaning you spend 1 gold digging every single turn. Let's suppose you try to play the standard curve on Eudora. Turn 1 is hero power and buying any tavern spell, right? Turn 2, it'll cost 4 gold to level. If you don't have a tavern coin, it's impossible to level and hero power at the same time. Because of this, you must buy a minion and hero power on turn 2. Then, turn 3, you can level and hero power, and turn 4 you can also level and hero power, achieving the ultimate goal of getting your treasure Tavern 3 and turn 4. Any other curve and you end up either not getting your dig on turn 4 or not getting your dig on Tavern 3, both of which is very suboptimal for Captain Eudora. You may also want to level to Tavern 2 on turn 3 on heroes such as Maiev or Rafam because it's an easy way to fit in your hero power every single turn. Turn 1, you always buy a minion. Turn 2, you buy a minion in hero power. And then turn 3, you level and hero power and spend the remaining 1 gold hopefully buying a tavern spell. Playing standard curve on Rafam or Maiev means that you won't be able to hero power turn 2, and the main strength of these types of heroes is the fact that they can hero power every turn and buy a unit for 1 gold to fill out your board as fast as possible. So you really don't want to miss out on those early hero powers. Another leveling curve you may encounter is leveling to Tavern 2 on turn 4. Staying on Tavern 1 for this long doesn't make sense on most heroes because of the poor quality of 1 drops. So it's best to avoid this curve. However, some heroes don't really care about the quality of 1 drops when they do this curve. One such hero is Cario Rome, who can buff these bad 1 drops into decent ones. The best line for this hero is to buy 3 units the first 3 turns, and then on turn 4 you want to level to Tavern 2 and hero power, and on turn 5 you want to level to Tavern 3 and hero power, and on turn 6 you want to level to Tavern 4 and hero power. Unfortunately, Cario is not a great hero, so even though this is the best line for her, it's still not a great line. Galakrond, on the other hand, is a much better hero that utilizes this exact same curve. Galakrond aims to hero power and freeze the same unit over and over again until you find a 5 drop or a 6 drop you're content with. You can't do standard curve with this hero because then you can't hero power on turn 2 and you need to hero power and freeze every turn starting from turn 1. It also doesn't quite make sense to level on turn 3 on this hero because you end up freezing your 1 drops anyways due to the nature of the hero power, so it's better to just buy mediocre 1 drops for the insane payoff of having a 5 drop or a 6 drop later on. In summary, you want to level on turn 2 80 to 90% of the time. The other 10 to 20% you don't level is because you have a specific one-cost hero power where you don't have enough gold to hero power and level on turn 2. Because of that, you either level on turn 3 or turn 4 depending on what your hero wants to do. I know there's a lot of hero-specific knowledge in the mix to determine which curve to take, and I can only give examples for some of these heroes. However, if you ever want to learn which curve that is the most optimal on every single hero, I wrote a short guide on how to play every single one of them, so make sure to use that resource in your games if you want. The link to that will be in the description. Chapter 2. Leveling to Tavern 3. One thing I have to talk about so that we're on the same page. For most heroes, when to level to Tavern 3 is not set at the start of the game. Always curve out with your shops. You may be planning on buying 2 units in one turn, but then you see your shop is just full of 1-drops, and that's okay. You should just be flexible and consider leveling instead. One of the core principles to Hearthstone Battlegrounds is don't buy trash, and I never want you guys to be forced to buy trash just because you feel like you have to follow a specific leveling curve. With that out of the way, let's talk about leveling to Tavern 3 and Tavern 4. First, let's talk about leveling on turn 3, which is called 3 on 3. I know the first thing on some of your guys' mind. Every time I go 3 on 3, I just brick on my shop and die. Well, guess what? You're also guaranteed to die if you stay down on Tavern 2 buying 2 1-drops. Yes, there's probably more of a chance that you'll be screwed with a bad shop, but a lot of the time you'll be buying great 3-drops, and you can actually trade really well into other people's 2-drops, and then you can become ahead of the curve by turn 5. If you're buying trash because you're too scared to go 3 on 3, you'll always be behind, because just assume your opponents are not buying trash as well. The other things you guys are probably wondering throughout this video is what is considered trash. I keep throwing around what trash is like it's so easy to understand, but it's actually pretty complicated. Trash is something you just have to identify from experience because it varies a lot from meta to meta. So instead, I'll explain some things that are generally not trash. The first thing you want to look for are strong pairs that impact your board. A pair of Briarback Bookie, a pair of Scarlet Skull, a pair of Thaumatologists, you get the point. These are all strong pairs that you want to buy because they'll save you a lot of HP on top of being a pair, and pairs are especially important because it increases your chance of tripling into direction. A pair of Mana Sabers or a pair of Corpse Recyclers are examples of pairs you don't want to buy because their board impact is just way too little and you're already going to start putting yourself behind. The other thing that is not considered trash is synergistic combos. Skyfin Parch Wander is not trash because it's a combo that is strong for your board. Thaumatologist Lava Lurker is another really strong combo, and Mana Saber Hungry Snapjaw also turns Snapjaw into a pretty good unit. Having these combos basically ensures that you win every early game fight, and then you enter the mid game with a solid board state and a lot of HP, exactly what you wanted. The last thing that is not considered trash is a good play with a non-token start. Selling your turn 1 buy to double buy or level on turn 3 always feels the worst, so you should look for reasons to save your 1-drop. 2-cost spells, Tad, Patient Scout are all very good reasons to stay down on Tavern 2 because they fix your curve. Leveling to Tavern 3 on turn 4 is usually just a matter of not buying trash as well. It doesn't matter what curve you're doing, the preference is always towards leveling as opposed to buying units that should not be on your board whatsoever. Do not buy a Hungry Snapjaw without beasts, do not buy an Electric Synthesizer without dragons, just level. And finally, leveling to Tavern 3 on turn 5. If you got to this point and your board is full of high tempo and high potential 2-drops, you're doing it right. Ideally, this is what you want most of your games to be like. Buy a minion turn 1, level turn 2, buy a minion and a spell turn 3, buy 2 minions turn 4, and on turn 5 you level and buy. Congrats! You're now at full HP, a strong board, and hopefully have pairs to triple into 5-drops and 6-drops to define the rest of your game. Obviously, not all games can be this good, but a good chunk of the time you actually do get just very good rolls the entire game, and you just take those. And by the way, unless there's a game warping mechanic, such as quests, you should never level to Tavern 3 past turn 5. You will fall behind. Now let's go through some examples of spots where I leveled to Tavern 3. First, in this situation, 3-on-3 is a pretty tempting line because the shop isn't too appealing. The best card in this shop is an Oozling Gladiator, which is borderline not trash with it being a 4-4 stat line, but the rest of the cards are not buyable at all. The reason why I don't prefer 3-on-3 here is because then I would be selling my Misfit Dragonling to do so, which is a very good unit, so staying down to save the Misfit Dragonling is better. The best line of play here is to stay down and also buy the spell with the Oozling Gladiator. This one falls into the category of a good play with a non-token start. With a South Sea Busker or Sunbacon Relaxer opener instead, I would not care about saving my 1-drop and I'd probably just go 3-on-3. On the other hand, in this clip, I had 6 gold with a Hungry Snapdraw and it cost 6 to level. Buying 2 units here would count as buying trash because Zesty Shaker is a 3-4 with no synergy whatsoever, and the other 3 units are worthless 1-drops. Don't be scared to go 3-on-3 and buy some actually useful cards. And finally, let's go through what a typical standard curve looks like, where you level to Tavern 2 on turn 2 and Tavern 3 on turn 5. From turn 3, I got a shop with great synergy, so I definitely want to buy both the Hungry Snapdraw and the Mana Saber to make my mid-game pretty strong. I opted to double buy turn 3 and then also double buy turn 4 and finally level buy on turn 5 to round out my board. As you can see, unlike leveling to Tavern 2, there's not one line you do most of the time when it comes to leveling to Tavern 3. All of them are equally common and viable. Just remember to play flexibly and curve out with your shops. Let's move on to the next chapter. Chapter 3. Leveling to Tavern 4. Now we're getting into the territory where we stop looking at the shops and start looking at our board state to determine whether we level or not. Let's cover all the scenarios. Scenario 1. Leveling to Tier 4 on turn 4. You actually do this sometimes, but do not overdo it. Maybe like 5% of your games you're forced to play this curve. Sometimes your shops are just really bad. Then you go 4-on-4 for the same reason that you go 3-on-3, is to not buy trash. However, you're not going 4-on-4 to curve out or just because you want to. It's not a good spot to be in. You will go 8th like a good percentage of the time. It's just better than not buying trash. Scenario 2. Level to Tier 4 on turn 5. This is another don't buy trash moment. On turn 5, you have 7 gold, so your options are either to double buy or to level. Here's a situation worth discussing because you guys will find yourself in this spot a lot. Let's say you level to 3 on turn 4, which is quite common, and on turn 5, you see no buyable units. A lot of you would be tempted to roll, hoping your next shop has 2 buyable units. This is not consistent, and most of the times you should just level here. I think this spot is complicated to explain in the sense that I've played it both ways and just noticed that rolling in this spot just never worked. Because it's just far too unlikely that your next shop will have 2 buyable units, and then if you don't double buy here, your spot is kind of screwed. If your shop has 1 buyable unit though, like a Warden of Old or Deflectobot or a Cortotron, go for it. The chance that your next shop has 1 more buyable unit is way higher than the chance that your next shop has 2. And then you're buying good units guaranteed and feel pretty good about yourself. And of course, if your shop has 2 buyable units, go ahead and buy them. The other 2 scenarios are leveling to Tier 4 on turn 6 or turn 7. I think to know which to do, the first and foremost thing you should observe is how many units your board actually has. If your board is full, then most likely you shouldn't be staying down and replacing units for slightly better units. That's just way too inefficient. The other thing you have to ask yourself is whether you're stable. You might only have 5 units on your board, but can still be incredibly strong. For example, you might have Scalawag Ripsnarl opener and you think you're strong enough to level, even though you have 5 units. However, there are situations where you'll most likely take 10 damage if you level and maybe nothing if you don't. I think if your board is not full and you don't feel yourself strong enough to level or have enough HP to level, then you should try to buy stabilizing units on Tavern 3. This once again includes great pairs, synergies, and maybe specific board buffs such as Natural's Blessing. Let's cover some examples about leveling to Tavern 4. This example is a spot where I didn't level because my board is not full, and I think buying the Implant Subject pair plus the Fountain Chiller will be enough stabilization to then level straight to Tavern 5. Next up, this is a spot where you definitely level to Tavern 4 because I feel strong with the Thaumatologist Zesty Shaker combo, and it's nice and clean to spend 6 gold leveling and 3 gold buying a unit. So even though I don't have a full board, I feel strong enough and have enough HP to justify leveling here. Chapter 4. Leveling to Tavern 5 and 6. You might ask yourself, should I level to 5 or 6 and then proceed to be like, why not, it's shiny, and then roll for nothing and die. Let's avoid that. Unlike the previous 3 Tavern tiers, leveling to 5 and 6 is not at all about the turn number. You may level to 5 as early as turn 7 and as late as turn 12. Sometimes you can even win on Tavern 4, but that depends on meta, of course. There are a couple of considerations. The first question you need to ask yourself is, what am I leveling for? Valid answers to this question are, so I can level to 6 next turn and start buying 6 drops, or I would level for Hollow Rover or Bran or Moonsteel Juggernaut or whatever, or maybe I have a lot of pairs and I want to try to triple into 6 drops. Invalid answers include because I feel like it or to deal 1 extra damage, because if your goal is to level to 6 and start rolling for 5 drops such as Titus Rivendare and Catacomb Crasher, your odds at hitting 5 drops is pretty much the same on Tavern 5 and Tavern 6, so you're just paying up front for something that doesn't benefit you, and you better have a good reason for leveling to 6. One thing I need to get out of the way, rolling on Tavern 4, 5, or 6 is actually pretty meta specific. In the past, there are metas where 6 drops were so horrible, people never leveled to 6 and tripled into 5 drops and stabilized on Tavern 4 mainly. Right now, I would say is close to one of those metas, but it will likely change. There have been metas where 5 drops are pretty bad and you generally don't want to roll on 5 to stabilize. And there are metas where even 4 drops are just horrible, people just skip Tavern 4, stabilize on Tavern 3, and try to get to Tavern 5. And this doesn't even have to be meta specific, this can also be tribe specific. Specific tribes favor specific Tavern tiers. Elementals and Pirates favor high rolling on Tavern 6, while a lot of Undead and Beast comps do not need any 6 drop whatsoever. Make sure you can name a handful of units that would be relevant to your board on higher Tavern tiers before you actually press the level button. Like, how silly would it sound if you wanted to level to 6 with a full Beetle setup for Goldrin, when in reality, finding your Beetle scaling is just so much better than trying to pivot into Goldrin. That's just an example, and also will likely change as meta changes. Goldrin is just really bad right now. However, even if you want to level to 5 or 6, a lot of the times you just can't level. Therefore, the second question you have to ask yourself is, will I die if I level? If you're at 36 HP, most likely you will not die if you level, because if you take 10 damage, you don't really care. If you're at 15 HP on the other hand, with a not so strong board, I'm sorry to say, you're probably going to have to stabilize on Tavern 4 or 5 until you're content with your board. At some point though, there will be no improvements to be made on your current Tavern tier, and your main power spikes left are just on higher Tavern tiers. Thus, be aware of which improvements matter for your board. A turn 7 Menagerie Jug is pretty solid board upgrade for stabilizing, but a turn 12 Menagerie Jug is a huge waste of 2 gold. So if it's getting to those later turns, even if you can slightly improve on Tavern 4, it's probably just more productive to level. It all depends on what your biggest improvements are. So before you start rolling, mentally list out a couple of units that you'd be happy buying. And if that list is too short, one of two things. Either expand that list or just level because there's actually not anything on your current Tavern tier that will improve your board. Lastly, there are cases where you have strong reasons to believe you'll win your next fight despite your low HP total, and you just want to get to Tavern 5 and play for the win. Maybe this is against Ghost or an opponent you know also level to 5 with a worse setup. This is a good level spot, but you really don't want to be wrong in your assessment because losing this fight for no reason could just cost you the game. Let's end this chapter with some examples. This is an example of a board that can go straight to Tavern 5 on turn 7. It has massive mid-game tempo with the Thaumatologist Lava Liquor combo, which saved lots of HP. The Arcane Cannoneer also helps save a ton of HP, and the 2 Warna Volts gives me a lot of gold to help me find my direction on Tavern 5 or Tavern 6. This is an example of a board that will go straight 8th if you level. You don't have any tempo and not too much HP either to work with. With the gold you get from the free dealing gamblers, you can get a lot stronger by buying high tempo 4-drops and spells so you don't lose your next few fights and potentially become strong enough to level to Tavern 5 the turn after. And finally, this is an example of a spot where you could go 6 because it's strong enough but you just don't want to. The list of units you'd want to buy here are Catacomb Crasher, Titus, Abomination, and Caretaker, and no cards on Tavern 6 actually improves your board. This video is my longest video yet, so I'd appreciate it so much if you just shared it to anyone just getting into Battlegrounds. As I said, leveling is such a crucial aspect to Hearthstone Battlegrounds, and I think I covered basically everything there is to know about it. If you want to watch more guides, well, first of all, subscribe, but also I have a minion guide and a spell guide as well, so you can know which cards are actually trash and which aren't, if you want to check those out. Peace.